Hello teacher, hello everyone. This time we will talk about Incoterms 2020. Team members Maciel Salas, José Morales, Pistel Chaparro and Oriana Contreras.
Introduction. First of all, what are Incoterms? They are international trade terms that facilitate the international purchase sale because they set out terms and conditions that aim to simplify and clarify important aspects in the exercise of the marketing of goods. They are clear universal rules that express rights and obligations with respect to the parties involved in this activity, which have been in constant evolution and adaptation until currently obtained the Incoterms 2020, which we will discuss below. Before starting, it is important to highlight that these terms are divided in a classification according to transportation criteria. First, Incoterm for any mode of transportation, multimodal, and those that are only used in maritime and inland waterway transportation. Multimodal Incoterms, CIP or Carriage and Insurance Phase 2, establishes that it is the seller's responsibility to deliver the goods on the intended destination, covering the cost of the international freight and insurance costs. The CIP Incoterm is the one of the two Incoterms, the other is the CAF, which insurance is mandatory, whereas the seller is the party responsibility for obtaining cargo insurance and also providing the bearing with an insurance document, so that the buyer, if required, and make a claim under this insurance. Now the following: obligation of the seller, delivery of goods and required documents, packing and packaging, inland transportation in the country of origin, custom hailing charge at the origin, international freight and insurance, obligation of buyer, payment of the goods, inspect at destination, custom hailing charge at destination, inland transportation in the country of the destination, payment of duties and taxes. Second Incoterm, CPT, establishes that the seller must deliver the goods to its carrier without indicating whether this must be done at the seller facilities, whether it must be loaded on the collecting vehicle or delivered to the other facilities. The important formalities are the responsibility of the buyer and those of export plus transportation of the goods are responsibility of the seller, where two important places must also be established: the place of delivery and seller's country and the place of the destination, so that the seller can provide the contracting of transportation. Now, obligation of the buyer, payment of the price of goods, as established in the contract, in addition to complying with the form and time of payment clauses established therein. 2. Receive the goods at the place of destination. Third and finally, to assume risks or damages after the delivery has been successful. Obligation of the seller, to cover after aspects with respect to cost and transportation. 2. To deliver the goods uncontracted contractor. 3. To assume risk of damage until the goods are delivered to their destination.
Deliver at place, destination. Requires the seller to deliver to a place designated by a buyer, usually the buyer's premises. The buyer is responsible for unloading the means of transport. The seller must make the export arrangement and the buyer must make the import arrangements. Seller's obligations. To provide the goods and its commercial invoice as required by the seller's contract. To assume almost all responsibility for making the goods available to the buyer at the agreed place of destination. It is the seller's responsibility to arrange or contract for the transportation of the goods to the named place of destination. Obligation of the buyer. To take delivery of the goods, provided that they had been delivered under the terms described in the contract. To pay to the seller all costs related to the goods from the time of their delivery If agreed in the contract, the buyer must notify the seller well in advance of the time and point within the place of destination where delivery is to be made. DPU, delivered at place unloaded. Now has delivered at place unloaded where the seller assumes all costs, including main transport and insurance, not compulsory, until the goods are placed at the place of disposal of the buyer, assuming the risk until that moment. Allows to agree delivery at any place, not necessarily at the terminal. DDP, delivery duty paid. Delivery duty paid where the seller is responsible for delivering the goods to the named place in the buyer country. At pays all costs of getting the goods to their destination, including import duty and taxes. The seller is not responsible for unloading.
Now we see the EXW or exports, where the seller or exporter makes the goods available to the buyer in their own warehouse and the only responsible for paying the goods. Then the buyer or importer bear all the costs and responsibilities from the moment the goods cross the warehouse prior to the landing. The insurance is not mandatory, but should it be required, it will be taken up by the buyer. EXW is the most favorable to the seller because he hasn't the obligation to land the goods and cover the freight cost once of the goods have left the premises. But this term can cause complication to the buyers if the products are for export. Now we see the FCA, free carrying, where the seller is responsible for delivering to the goods to the buyer's nominal permits. He needs to load the stock into the buyer's transportation. Then the seller organizes the shipping, including export clearance and meeting security requirements. The risk is transferred of the goods are landed into the buyer's transportation. Thus, any damages to the products when the burden diversions is the responsibility of the buyer. The buyer pays the cost of the freight, bill of lading, fees, and insurance. Also, he pays for a landing and transportation costs to the final destination. Another is CFR, cost and fares. The seller is responsible for all costs until the goods arrive at the destination port, including export clearance, costs at origin, fares, and usually unloading costs. The buyer is responsible for import products and transport to destination. They also bear the risk from the moment the goods are on board. Although it is not mandatory, the buyer usually takes out insurance. This Incoterms is only used in shipping.
In the same way, and in continuity with the exclusive use of Incoterms for navigable or maritime routes, we have CIF, or Cost Insurance and Freight. When the seller is insured of costs until the arrival of the goods at the port of the unloading in the country of destination, and must contract international transport insurance with minimum coverage, which corresponds to Clause C of the Institute Cargo Clause of London, when the buyer is responsible of the operations cost of the final destination, including unloading costs of the goods at the port terminal in the country of arrival. Well, we also have FAST, or Free Alongside Ship, when the seller fulfills his obligation to deliver when the goods have been placed alongside the ship, on the quay or embarked at the named port of shipment. When the buyer is required to clear the goods road custom for export. Okay, and finally, we have FOB, free on board, when the seller lost the goods and takes care of the transportation until the goods are placed and lodged inside the ship or loading dock at the agri port of shipment. He is also in charge of the custom formalities at the port and the settlements the costs he netted at the port terminal of the port. And the buyer is in charge of the international maritime transport and all those operations and formality of the final destination. In conclusion, as it could be evidence, Incoterms are fundamental tools for international transaction. That is why it is the use of the utmost important to determine and agree the interests of the seller and the buyer, where they can choose in the full arguments which Incoterms is better for them. Likewise, it must be taken into account that no version of the Incoterms replaces the other, even they can work together, anytime, either form, 22, 2010, or 2020.